Chapter 47, Chapter 41. The summer holidays, the time of year every student eagerly waited for. 6 blissful weeks of nothing, no homework, no early starts, no professors. No, anything. Eliza was so bored, so incredibly bored. Sirius had banned her from practicing necromancy 2 days into the summer holidays after one of her skeleton rats had escaped her room and ran into Sirius on the stairs. Dead things gave Sirius the heebie-jeebies, and he said if he saw another reanimated skeleton he'd cry. Eliza knew it wasn't an empty threat, and so she packed her one lonely necromancy book away and started focusing on other things, namely sneaking around the Black Library with Creature. She had found many old texts stuffed in all sorts of crooks and crannies. Remus had taken one look at her tower of books and had sighed, offering her some tea to go with her reading. They were the best. Today was different, however. Today Eliza wouldn't be bored because today Blaze finally arrived. Sirius and Remus had been remarkably calm about the news that Blaze would be living with them for the summer. Sirius fully supported anyone's rebellious phase and was more than happy to open up Grimold to Blaze. Remus hadn't even batted an eye and had just asked when the boy would be arriving. It made sense. Remus had witnessed all their boggarts firsthand after all. He knew how dysfunction her court's families could be. "Pup, would you please stop pacing?" "Shut up," she responded easily, but did in fact stop pacing and perched herself on the arm of their sofa as they all waited for Blaze to arrive through the flu. His things had arrived early this morning. A few suitcases had arrived from Italy, and Eliza wasn't surprised that half of Blaze's things were already stored at her court's manors. Alexander had sent over quite a few boxes, and Narcissa had dropped in herself to deliver a suitcase of Blaze's things. She also stayed for afternoon tea, which was essentially a very entertaining hour of Sirius and Narcissa slagging off almost every politician in Wizarding Britain. Eliza and Remus had sat across the table, badly trying to muffle their own laughter as they sipped on their cups of tea. She really loved her family. Eliza leapt to her feet when the flu flared, and before Blaze had even fully stepped out of the fireplace, Eliza was already hugging him. He towered over her now, because even though Eliza had stopped growing sometime in her 4th year, Blaze just hadn't stopped. She felt the tension slowly drop out of him, and she pulled away with a smile. It was odd seeing Blaze so nervous. He was usually so confident in himself, but Eliza remembered how nervous she was when she met Draco's parents, or even Theo's grandfather. Parents were intimidating. "Blaze," Eliza said happily as she dragged him further into the living room. "You know Sirius and Remus, obviously." She rambled on, but was interrupted when Sirius abruptly joined the conversation. "As if little Zabini could forget me. He's almost as tall as you, Sirius." Remus cut in, and Eliza snorted at their usual antics. "Thank you for letting me stay here, sir, Professor," Blaze said seriously, inclining his head to both of them, and Sirius faked gagging in the corner. "Don't call me Sir Kid. It makes me feel old. Just call me Sirius or Padfoot," he tacked on as an afterthought, and Eliza watched when Blaze smiled back, looking more comfortable. "Thank you then, Sirius. Why are you Slytherins always so formal?" he scoffed, but Remus smacked him in the arm. "Feel free to call me Remus as well, Blaze," he said warmly. "I've not been a teacher in quite some time." Blaze waved a hand distractedly, obviously feeling more himself. "You were the best we've ever had anyway. Honestly, Umbridge sealed her fate the second she insulted you. Even the Weasley twins adored you." "Ah, yes, Fred and George," Remus said with an evil smile that spelt nothing but trouble. "We really should visit their shop one of these days. We need to get Blaze settled in first." Eliza finally interrupted and grabbed Blaze by his hand, dragging him behind her as they trailed up the stairs. "We've already made up a room for you. It's just next door to mine, so you can find me if you need anything. You can unpack everything yourself, of course, but none of us mind helping Creature's making tea right now, so..." Eliza, Blaze cut in, stood in front of his new bedroom. "It's perfect, okay? Stop worrying and rambling." Eliza sniffed pompously. "I have never rambled in my life." "Thank you very much." Blaze laughed slightly and patted the top of her head because he was a giant and also a prick. "I can unpack everything myself. I'll join you for tea later, yeah." Eliza studied him, giving him a scrutinizing glare before she nodded. "I'll knock on later," she said finally, and turned to slip into her own room before she paused at the door. Oh, and Blaze. Welcome home. Living with Blaze was ridiculously fun. He had been roped into learning how to ride Sirius motorbike with Eliza, and he had also taken to working in their overgrown courtyard garden. He really was quite good at herbology, and the second he had seen what a disgrace their backyard was, and he immediately jumped at the chance to fix it. Eliza had spotted Remus and Blaze in the garden many times over the week. She dreaded to think what embarrassing stories they were both swapping, but at least they were happy. Sadly, their somewhat relaxed summer holiday was interrupted by a home invasion in the second week. It was time for an order meeting, and it was also time for Eliza and Blaze to cause some chaos. Both she and Blaze were early risers, Blaze because he was just like that, and Eliza was out of habit. She didn't particularly like waking up early, but she had to for so many years that it was hard for her to sleep in now. She had been invited into the order meeting today, but Blaze hadn't. But that didn't mean she was going to kick him out. They were sat in the parlor, where most of the order members came through. Blaze had taken over the kitchen that morning and, as promised, had made them a fancy Italian breakfast. A steaming cup of black coffee was on the table for him, and Eliza had convinced Creature to help her make a mocha. The first attempt was disastrous. However, their second attempt was much better. Essentially, she and Blaze were fully prepared to be pretentious pricks and cause some chaos. The pair of them exchanged matching smirks as the flue flared only to blink in surprise when Severus grumpily stepped out of the fireplace. Eliza felt a grin growing on her face and kicked her legs up to rest on the sofa before she opened her mouth. "Good morning, Professor," she chirped. "Wonderful day, isn't it?" Blaze snorted at the dead look in Severus' eyes, which drew the professor's attention onto him. "Why are you here, Zabini?" he asked tiredly, and Eliza laughed brightly. "I live here now, for the summer at least. I make breakfast. Eliza murders people and Sirius kindly ignores the fact that I should probably be paying rent." Eliza watched as Severus blinked uncomprehendingly for several moments before he let out a resigned sigh, possibly accepting the fact that his life would always be nonsensical as long as he knew Eliza. He was just about to leave before he halted in the doorway, eyeing up the breakfast spread on the coffee table. "Is that coffee?" he asked, gesturing to Blaze's still piping mug of black coffee. They had barely nodded in response before Severus picked up Blaze's mug and downed it in one motion. Without even giving Eliza time to react, he also reached down and stole hers. He stalked out of the room, taking their coffee with him. "I worry about him," Eliza said, and Blaze promptly burst into laughter. More order members poured in, most not even bothering to question the two teens sprawled on the sofa in front of them, although they did get a rather strange look on their face as they walked by. It wasn't until the Weasleys poured in did they really get to have their fun. "What are they doing here?" Ron demanded angrily when the family all poured into the room. Blaze let a shocked look appear on his face as he turned to face Eliza. "Why, I don't know. It's almost as if we live here," he drawled and leaned over to steal a sip of Eliza's coffee. Ron was spluttering, but Molly Weasley bustled into the room, Arthur tramping in behind her. "Now, Ron, we don't have time for this. Your father and I are attending the order meeting. Look after your sister, and for Merlin's sake, don't get into trouble," Mrs. Weasley screeched, but Eliza assumed that was just her default volume setting. Molly and Arthur left the room, leaving Blaze and Eliza alone with Ron and Ginny. "Yes, listen to your mother, Ron. Stay out of trouble," Eliza repeated mockingly as she leaned up from her seat. "Or don't you, really, Weasley?" Eliza drawled, tilting her head. "You're really going to threaten me in my own house." "Oh, don't be too harsh on him, Eliza. We all know he's one wand short of a Lumos." Blaze cut in, and Eliza had to clamp down her laughter as Ron's face turned redder and redder. "Not that this hasn't been fun, but I really do need to get going," Eliza said swiftly, growing bored of taunting Weasley. His brothers were far more entertaining. "Where are you going?" Ginny asked, eyes narrowed as she watched Eliza. "Well, there is an order meeting. Just because you have nothing worth contributing to it doesn't mean the rest of us are useless." She left, hearing Blaze's mad laughter echo around the room. "Pop. So nice of you to join us," Sirius exclaimed the second Eliza shuffled into the room, fluffy socks sliding across the floor. I had to make myself a new coffee because someone stole mine, Eliza said, waving her mug of coffee about to make her point. Severus snorted softly in the corner, and Eliza smirked at him before she took a seat next to Sirius. Why is she here? Moody growled out, kids shouldn't be in this meeting. Eliza was fully prepared to defend herself, but to her surprise, she didn't need to. I think you'll find that Eliza isn't an ordinary kid, Severus drawled, and Eliza blinked in surprise. It was always so odd to hear Severus complimenting people instead of insulting them. Course you defend her, all you Slytherins are the same. Hey, a woman with bright pink bubblegum hair cut in, I take offense to that. It took Eliza a few seconds to place her before she realized that the woman was in fact Nymphadora Tonks, daughter of Andromeda Black, who had of course been a Slytherin. Before the arguing could spiral any further, Dumbledore finally walked into the room. Eliza kept a bored expression on her face and forcibly kept her hand relaxed around her mug of coffee. Moody's magical eye hadn't left her for a second. I see you've all met our newest Order member, Dumbledore said easily, and everyone fell silent when he spoke. Eliza didn't like the man, but she could respect the power he commanded. Why is she here, Dumbledore? Marley asked, and Eliza wrinkled her nose in distaste. She is here because I'm your best shot at winning this war, Eliza cut in, highly amused. This set off a whole new round of arguing, and Eliza scoffed quietly. You didn't tell them. She questioned Dumbledore, who shook his head minutely. I thought it would be prudent to let you tell them, he responded, as if he had ever given a damn about what Eliza thought was most prudent before. Sighing to herself, Eliza leaned back in her chair as all attention turned on to her. Hello, I'm Eliza Potter, and also your prophesied savior. Pleasure to meet you, Eliza said with a bright and cheery grin. There were 3 reactions to her proclamation. Resigned exasperation, i.e. Severus and Remus, bemused acceptance, i.e. Sirius and Dumbledore, and going absolutely batshit, i.e. literally everyone else. What do you mean, prophesied savior? She's just a kid, like she could beat anyone in a duel, said Moody with a scoff, and Eliza grinned. I could beat you in a duel, she retorted, but before their argument could continue, Dumbledore interrupted. Eliza is telling the truth. She is the prophesied downfall of Voldemort. You could hear a pin drop. No one said anything in the face of that declaration, and before anyone could gather their wits, Dumbledore continued to speak. And as we're on the matter of Voldemort, I called an emergency meeting today to share some important news. For those of you who were at the Department of Mysteries, you may be privy to some of this information. A few weeks ago, Lord Voldemort's Death Eaters took Sirius hostage in order to lure Eliza to the Department of Mysteries to retrieve a prophecy. A prophecy that Voldemort never heard that I already knew in full. Voldemort left before the Aurors arrived, but revealed some highly sensitive information. That for the past few years, Voldemort has been masquerading under another guise, Thomas Gaunt. The Order once again exploded into noise, and Eliza understood why Severus hated these meetings so much. Wasn't he the Durmstrang champion? Vance asked, and Dumbledore nodded. But doesn't that mean everyone turned to look at Eliza, who frowned mulishly. Weren't you dating him? Tonks questioned, and Eliza spluttered, not even faking having to feel flustered by the question. We weren't dating, Eliza said, and Sirius snorted next to her. Could have fooled me. Shut up. I knew that boy was nothing but trouble, Marley yammered on, but she was interrupted by Daedalus Diggle. Well, she's probably trouble as well, he said, and Eliza felt Sirius tense beside her. She lay a pacifying hand on his shoulder and let Diggle continue. I mean, who knows what sort of dark magic he taught her? How can we trust her? I bet she's just like him. Moody scowled, and Eliza had to resist the urge to punch him. Instead, she decided to sort this whole mess out once, and for all so she could return to Blaze as soon as possible. You know what? Eliza questioned, cocking her head as she turned her gaze onto Moody. I am trouble. I do know dark magic, but none of you were complaining when you thought I'd be using it to murder a man for you. They all shifted uncomfortably at that. And yes, Tom and I, she calls him Tom, Diggle scoffed under his breath, and Eliza turned her razor-sharp glare onto him instead. He was a man before he was a monster, Mr. Diggle, and if any of you cared to remember that, you'd probably be damned less scared of him. Tom and I are quite alike. I know how his mind works, which means I know what he'll do next. You need me in the order, whether you like it or not. However true that may be, Marley bustled. You're still a child. You can't fight. I would gladly duel your most proficient fighters right now. Eliza cut in smoothly, feeling her patience wear thin. But I'm afraid we damage the fine china in my house. Elf would be inconsolable. I have an easier way to settle this ceaseless, ridiculous worry. Shacklebolt, Eliza addressed, turning to face the aura who had remained quiet throughout the discussion. At the Quidditch World Cup, the Death Eater raid, you found 2 dead Death Eaters, didn't you? Yes, but how did you? The Ministry said they killed each other, but you knew better. Deaths were gory, and the site was saturated in dark magic, but you never found the real killer. A look of horrified realization swept across the aura's face. They wanted to kill me, so I killed them, Eliza said, and she knew the grin on her face was a bit too unhinged for polite company, but serious. Hand was gripping hers under the table, so everything was okay. I was 14, and took out 2 seasoned Death Eaters without a scratch. You're a monster, Diggle breathed, and Eliza smiled as serious. Remus and Severus all bristled at his words. Yes, I am, Eliza said easily, but I'm a monster who's on your side. So let's get down to business, shall we? Eliza stumbled out of the flue with a curse. Actually, she stumbled out of the flue with multiple curses because Blaze had pushed her into it before she could even get her shoes on, which meant the first time she was let into one of Tom's Death Eater meetings, she wasn't even wearing shoes. Even worse now, everyone could see her socks, which were not only odd, but also 2 wildly different, hideously bright colors. Eliza could never be bothered sorting her socks. She just dumped them all in her drawer and grabbed the first she saw. It wasn't like anyone could see them beneath her boots. Well, not until today. Nice socks. Shut up, Barty, Eliza responded, spinning around to face her ex-professor with a wide smile. He was looking a lot better these days, happier. It's good to see you, Eliza, he greeted warmly, and Eliza rolled her eyes, but allowed him to ruffle her hair anyway. That's what happened when all your friends were giants. Eliza had long since stopped complaining. I have to say that the Order meeting was absolutely disastrous, so I hope you prove yourself to be more entertaining, Eliza quipped, scanning the rest of the Death Eaters that were all sat along the long table. She could see Lucius, Narcissa, and Severus sat near the top. I did hear about that, Barty commented, but didn't you have fun terrorizing them? He asked, guiding her to the head of the table where 2 empty chairs sat. No, they were all dreadfully dull, and Severus wouldn't let me curse any of them. That's because you are trying to convince them you're on their side. The man cut in swiftly, and Eliza pouted. But that's no fun, Barty laughed quietly, and took his seat next to Bellatrix on the left side of the table, across from Lucius. Never a dull moment with you, Eliza, he said, and Eliza was about to respond when the doors slammed open and Tom stalked in, already looking somewhat murderous. He slipped into his chair at the head of the table silently and gestured for Eliza to take the seat next to him, a gesture which didn't escape the notice of his Death Eaters and also made Eliza's heart stutter oddly. How dare he make her have feelings? What's got you so murderous this early on in the morning? Eliza drawled, and she swore she heard the whole group take a collective gasp. Dumbledore, as always, Tom grumbled. I tried to meet up with Selwyn this morning, and his bloody order tried to tail me. Well, we knew that would happen the second you revealed yourself, Eliza pointed out, and Tom shot her a glare. That doesn't make them any less irritating, he responded easily, red eyes bright and angry. Someone, probably Barty, cleared their throat, and Tom snapped back to attention. Right. Yes, he said distractedly, before seemingly gathering himself. I called a meeting today to discuss the intel that Severus and, of course, Eliza have gathered for us on the Order, so we can start putting some of our plans into motion, my lord. Avery interrupted from down the table, and Eliza felt Tom tense next to her. I mean no disrespect, but why is she here? He asked with a sneer. The air grew thick with tension as Tom snapped his head towards Avery. Eliza is here because she's worth more than all of you driveling idiots put together. Eliza single-handedly resurrected me, built a new generation of supporters, infiltrated the Order, and has put into motion the ruination of Albus Dumbledore, Tom accentuated, and Eliza fought to keep her face blank, but she was sure a smug smirk crept onto her face anyway. What have you done for our cause, Avery? Silence. No. Tom drawled, nothing. Tom flicked his wand lazily and hit Avery with a curse Eliza was pretty sure removed the man's tongue. Don't bother contributing your worthless opinion in this meeting again, Avery. Now, Tom said with a pleased close-lipped smile, Severus, would you like to update us on the Order's movements? They believed my information about you attacking Tower Bridge. They've stationed 5 or 6 Order members there, including Emmeline Vance and Hester Jones. Excellent. Bellatrix, Rodolphus, Rabastan. You 3 can take out the Order members stationed there, Tom ordered, and Bellatrix grinned. Is the little Potter not joining us this time, my lord? Leave the poor girl alone, Bella, Rodolphus cut in, and Rabastan snorted. You just don't want to lose another duel. Tom let out an exasperated sigh next to her. I blame you for this. You turned all my Death Eaters unruly. Eliza let out a short laugh. It's not my fault you're not as intimidating anymore. Tom glared at her, but Eliza just continued to smirk, far too used to being on the receiving end of Tom's red-eyed glare to bother. Travers, Tom called, interrupting the still arguing Lestranges. Any update from the papers? You were right, my lord. Dumbledore is pulling any string he can to print a story in the Daily Prophet about you being Voldemort. But there's also talk of him exposing you as the Dark Lord's son. You made sure Thomas Gaunt had all the correct papers, so it's likely the Daily Prophet would run that story. Especially now you're so popular on the Wisengamot, Travers explained, and Tom's brows furrowed in thought. That wouldn't necessarily damage your reputation. Eliza Cuttin, your stance is well known in political circles, and you have allies in both the Dark and Light sect. If Dumbledore, the all-forgiving Light Lord, starts attacking you because of your parentage, then it only makes him look worse. Plus, if all else fails, you can just do an interview in Witch Weekly. What? Tom questioned, as Barty burst into laughter. She even heard Severus and Lucius sniggering in the corner. Narcissa was the only one to keep a straight face. Eliza rolled her eyes. Witch Weekly would love you. Tragic backstory, pretty face, an idealist fighting for a better future. You'd have the whole female population eating out of the palm of your hand. A dangerous smirk appeared on Tom's face. Is that your way of saying you love me, little star? Eliza shoved her hand in his face and pushed him away, cheeks burning slightly. It's my way of saying we can easily keep 5 steps in front of Dumbledore. A thank you would be appreciated. Eliza quipped, and Tom rolled his eyes in what Eliza hoped was somewhat exasperated fondness. Lucius. Updates. The good news about your frankly ridiculous ploy is that you actually pulled it off. Lucius spoke, and both she and Tom shared matching smirks. Dumbledore is so focused on Death Eaters and the movements of Thomas Gaunt that he's not paying attention to the bills being debated in the Wisengamot. The Light sect is growing weaker as Dumbledore focuses on recruiting Order members. Lucius explained easily and smiled, quietly pleased. In fact, I believe a few of our proposed bills might even be passed this next Wisengamot session. Excellent, Tom proclaimed. He continued to receive reports from his Death Eaters, and Eliza occasionally butted in before she grew quite bored. It seemed that Barty instantly caught on to her change in demeanor and shook his head warningly when Eliza rose her eyebrows in question. Rosia was rambling on about some utter drivel when Eliza leant back into her chair and kicked her legs out in front of her, resting them on the table. Rosia stopped speaking, and Eliza felt a grin grow on her face when Tom turned to face her. His eyes glanced towards her bright yellow and pink socks, and he pinched the bridge of his nose. "Where are your shoes?" Eliza shrugged innocently. Forgot them, Tom hissed, and Eliza swore he almost slipped into Parseltongue. Yes, forgot them. Tom looked like he was going to continue to berate her over her missing shoes, but instead he let out a sigh. Just get your feet off the table. He said, "You're not an animal." Severus shook his head slowly, but Eliza had already shifted. Now in her chair, she sat as a fox. Letting out a small yip, Eliza leaped from her chair and onto the table, parking herself in front of Tom, who was sat in a sort of flabbergasted silence. "Really?" he asked. Eliza simply cocked her head in response, tail swishing behind her, although she knew she made a mistake when a flash of a smirk crossed Tom's face. Before Eliza could move, he reached up to her on the table, picking her up, and unceremoniously dumped her in his lap. Eliza went to protest, letting out a small growl of annoyance, but then Tom started scratching behind her ears. Eliza was done for. She slumped boneless in his lap, eyes closed in content as she pushed closer into his hand. She stayed there, just like that, for the rest of the meeting. She understood why Sirius enjoyed being Padfoot so much. Sometimes everything being so simple was just so much better. She woke up some time later to Tom shaking her awake. Eliza let out a sleepy growled protest and tried to curl up again, but Tom was being very rude and not letting her go back to sleep. She needed to find a better Dark Lord who would let her use them as a hot water bottle while she napped. Darling, the others are gone. Time to wake up. Wake up. I will dump water on you if you don't move. That last threat stood out in particular. Eliza didn't much fancy being soaked in water. Letting out a sleepy yawn, Eliza leaped onto the table and shifted back in one smooth motion. The first few times she had attempted such a thing, she always landed on her face, but by now the transition was seamless. It was always strange returning to the human mind, however. Sirius was right when he said in your animagi form things were dulled, simpler. You had to cling on to your human mind, but animal instincts usually took over. It's why Sirius liked to chase pigeons in the park, and probably why Eliza had given into the temptation of being as close to Tom as possible. When did you become an animagus? He asked as Eliza stretched out contentedly. February. I think it was February, Eliza answered. Are all your dastardly Dark Lord meetings that boring? Yes, Tom replied without missing a beat and leaned back in his chair, sprawling out as if all willpower to remain poised and dignified had left him. At least they seem happy to have you back. They're idiots, yes, but at least they're not malicious idiots. Tom let out a small hum followed by an aggrieved sigh. I'll be glad when the elections are finished. My Death Eaters can only handle so much at once. Oh, poor Tom. How hard it is to take over the world when you're surrounded by incompetent fools, Eliza teased. Well, not everyone is an incompetent fool, he said, and Eliza preened. Why, thank you. I was actually speaking of Lucius. You forgot your shoes today, little star. He quipped with a half smile, and Eliza reeled back in false indignation before letting out a laugh. That wasn't my fault, you know. Blaze pushed me into the fireplace before I got my shoes on. Only you, little star. Only you, he said with a fond smile, and Eliza rolled her eyes. What did you need anyway? I doubt you woke me up just to tease me about my lack of shoes, she said, and smiled when Tom's nose wrinkled in distaste over her bright, luminous socks. Has Dumbledore spoken about anything regarding his futile Horcrux hunt to you yet? Tom questioned, and Eliza pulled a face. Not explicitly, she said, but he told us at the last Order meeting that he was going away for a while, and that they shouldn't contact him. Tom looked at her, completely deadpan, and no one thought to question that. Eliza shared a look with him. What do you think? Tom shrugged in a fair enough gesture before his brows furrowed in thought. So he's making a move for one of the Horcruxes. I suppose he'll be making a bid for the Gaunt Ring. It's the easiest to track down, as, like the magpie you used mysterious precious artifacts as the other soul containers. Well, what does that say about you? Tom asked with a damning smirk, and Eliza felt herself blush as she looked away from his ruby-red eyes. So he's heading for the Gaunt house in Little Hangleton then, Eliza said, and Tom nodded in response. Where he will quite obviously find nothing. The question is, what will he do next? Unless he doesn't find nothing, Eliza said, and glanced down at her hands, fiddling with the rings on her fingers. She kept them disillusioned most of the time, only lifting it at formal events. They drew quite a bit of attention after all. He knew she didn't have to wear them, but the weight of the rings was comforting even if no one could see them. She dropped the spell and slipped the Gaunt ring, Tom's ring, off her finger. You could plant this in the shack, put a curse on it, render it indestructible, keep him distracted as we pass more bills through the Wisengamot. Merlin, you might even be able to kill the bastard if you find the right curse, Eliza explained, and finally glanced up at Tom, who was looking at her with a strange look on his face. You kept it? He asked, and Eliza smiled in confusion. Of course I kept it, you moron. What else would I do with it? She scoffed, running her fingers over the old ring one last time. Overcome with a sudden urge, Eliza reached forward and grabbed Tom's hand. He tensed minutely as Eliza held his hand in her own, but made no effort to move away. She could feel his gaze on her, unwavering and questioning, but she didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she went to slip his family ring onto his pinky finger. It was because she was studiously not meeting Tom's eyes did she catch what happened as the ring finally left her hand. You saw that too, right? Eliza questioned, and Tom pulled the ring from her hand and held it up to the light, frowning at the stone that sat within it. Did I see the stone in my family ring mysteriously change color the second it left your hand? Yes, Tom said, staring at the now dull ring. It rested on Eliza's hand for near on 3 years, a glimmering obsidian. It had always shined faintly in the light, crystallized, and a strange marking etched on it. The second it had left her hand, it had turned into a dull, almost grey slab of rock. Tom let out a questioning hum. Ignore the strange, mysterious stone for now, Eliza asked. Ignoring the strange, mysterious stone for now, Tom echoed, and Eliza let out a snort before freezing when Tom pulled her hand back towards him. Besides, he said, as if nothing unusual was occurring, if that isn't a sign, then I don't know what is. A sign of what? Eliza asked, trying to keep her cool, as Tom slipped the ring back onto her pinky finger. The ring returned to its gleaming obsidian the second Tom pulled his hand away, and Eliza had to stop herself reaching for him again. That this ring clearly belongs with you. Eliza never believed what they said about butterflies in your stomach. But fuck did she believe them now. Dumbledore files accusations against Lord Gaunt. Dumbledore outs Lord Gaunt's past. Son of you-know. Who Lord Gaunt's secret past you-know-who's secret son which weekly. Britain's newest heartthrob Thomas Gaunt, son of you-know-who, and thought to be in a relationship with our very own saviour Eliza Potter, Rufus Scrimgeour. Our new minister Cornelius Fudge was nowhere to be seen as Rufus Scrimgeour accepted his new role as minister. Reports say that Fudge has actually been spotted in one of his holiday homes in southern France. Will he ever return to Britain? Just once, Eliza said, throwing the evening paper onto the table in front of them. Just once. I wish we could have a quiet, calm week. This is what all of us feel like around you, Blaise said, sipping his coffee, and Eliza elbowed him in the side in retaliation. He let out an indignant squawk and shuffled further down the sofa, cradling his coffee protectively. How do you cope? We don't, came Remus' immediate reply, and Eliza snorted slightly in response. Shouldn't you be visiting your beau anyway? Sirius asked, fiddling with the wireless to get the latest Quidditch match up, what with the election finally being over and all that. All that, Blaise echoed with a wry smile, and Sirius huffed. If you think I pay attention to politics, you're a fool. Before the argument could delve any further, as it often did when Sirius and Blaise decided to team up and cause some chaos, Eliza spoke up. I would normally go over, but I've been instructed to stay in tonight, Eliza said with a scoff. I'm going on a mission with Dumbledore. How exciting, Blaise drawled, and Eliza threatened to throw a cushion in his face before he held up a hand in mock surrender. Do you know what he needs you for? Remus asked calmly, and Eliza shrugged her shoulders. Has Dumbledore ever said anything coherent in his life? He just told me we were going to visit an old friend of his and that he wanted me to be there. Swat, Sirius coughed out, and Blaise shot him a wide-eyed look of disbelief. Eliza has killed more professors than I can count. I've killed two. 2 professors. That's still 2 more than the rest of us, Remus said like the traitor he was. Plus we never found out what happened to Lockhart, Blaise chimed in, and Eliza glared at him. I had nothing to do with Lockhart. Last I heard he was trying to make it in America. They all fell silent at that. Well, Blaise said before taking another gulp of coffee. Good for him. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Will you be back for tea? Remus asked, and Eliza gave him a deadpan look. Do you really think I know the answer to that? She asked, and Remus shook his head slowly in response as Eliza pulled her dragon-hide boots. Well, take your key, Sirius ordered lazily, and Eliza looked at him strangely. Why? We're taking Blaise to the cinema, without me. Well, you're too busy being a murderous swat playing vigilante with your head teacher, Blaise said, and Eliza was just about to respond when she remembered she was in fact supposed to be playing vigilante with her head teacher. Shit, she cursed, and dashed through the halls of Grimmauld, flinging the front door open to find Dumbledore stood on the steps looking somewhat bemused. Good evening, Professor, Eliza chirped, stamping down the murderous rage that filled her every time she caught sight of the man. And what vigilante crimes are we committing today? Dumbledore smiled at her, small and indulgent, as though she was just another student. Tonight, I've decided to visit an old dear friend of mine. We are here to persuade an old colleague of mine to come out of retirement and return to Hogwarts, Dumbledore said, as they wandered down the street. He was wearing a long, black, understated traveling cloak, and Eliza was glad she had donned some more muggleish clothes rather than her fancy wizarding ones. "And I'm here to do what, exactly?" "Oh, I'm sure we'll find a use for you," Dumbledore said vaguely, waving his hand distractedly as they came to a stop at the end of the street. "Yes, here will do just fine, I believe." "I assume we're apparating then?" Eliza asked, and Dumbledore nodded in response, holding out his arm. "Very good," Dumbledore said as she held onto his hand. "Well, off we go." With a loud crack, the two disappeared, landing in an old town square however many miles away. "And where have you taken us today, Professor?" Eliza questioned as they set off at a brisk pace down the street. "This, Eliza, is the charming village of Budley Babberton, and your old friend lives here. For now," Dumbledore said vaguely as they took another left, and Eliza let the silence envelope them for a few minutes before Dumbledore spoke. "And how are you faring these days, Eliza?" he asked softly. Probably couldn't have his little savior killing herself out of heartbreak before she went to die in a war. "Could be better," Eliza said sharply. "It would be a lot easier without Witch weekly speculating about our forbidden relationship. Every other day." Dumbledore let out a sigh as they walked. "Gossip is a fickle thing, my dear girl. They'll set their sights on something else soon enough. Here we are," Dumbledore said as they stopped in front of an old townhouse. The front door was hanging off its hinges. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You don't sound very concerned, Professor," Eliza couldn't help but say, but drew her wand anyway, her real one this time, and not the spare one. Dumbledore smiled vaguely and held his wand aloft, the strange one that Eliza always ended up staring at. Lumos, Dumbledore cast, and they both walked into the house together, creeping down the narrow hallway before they turned into a completely trashed living room. The grandfather clock in the corner had toppled and smashed to pieces, and the grand piano was on its side. The chandelier was smashed, furniture wrecked, and all down the walls blood slowly dripped, shimmering ominously in the wand light. "Not pretty, is it?" Dumbledore said lightly, and Eliza snorted. "A touch too overdone, in my opinion," she replied, and Dumbledore smiled wryly before plunging his wand into the side of the overturned armchair, which let out a loud ouch. "Good evening, Horace," Dumbledore said, greeting the old man who was massaging his lower belly and glaring at Dumbledore with watery eyes. "There was no need to stick the wand in that hard," he said gruffly. "It hurt." "What gave it away?" He grunted. He clambered to his feet, and Eliza felt a grin cross her face as she stepped up beside Dumbledore. "The Death Eaters aren't conducting raids anymore. They're operating in secret, which any friend of Dumbledore's should know, and they wouldn't leave such a mess, especially if they're only fighting one man." And miraculously, with even the chandelier on the floor, the armchair escaped all harm. Eliza rattled off, and although the man's face was slack, his eyes were shrewd. And of course, any wizard worth his wand would notice that it was dragon blood dripping down the walls. The old portly wizard remained quiet for a few seconds before nodding to himself. "Yes, dragon blood. My last bottle, actually. Although it might be reusable," he said, frowning at the blood dripping down the wall. "Would you like my assistance clearing up?" "Please." Eliza's laughter was muffled by the sound of the spontaneous renovations as Dumbledore fixed the house around them. Finally, with the chandelier finally screwed back into place, the two wizards lowered their wands. The man curiously uncorked his bottle of dragon blood and peered within it, cringing slightly. "Bit dusty," he muttered to himself, and placed the bottle down, and Dumbledore spoke up, finally making the introductions. "This is Eliza Potter. Eliza, this is Horace Slughorn." Eliza interrupted brightly, moving forward to shake the man's hand, and out of the corner of her eyes she saw Dumbledore smile, pleased. "You wouldn't believe how much I've heard about you," Slughorn visibly preened, unable to ignore the praise, but from the look in his eyes, he knew exactly what game she was playing. "Slytherin, eh?" he questioned, and Eliza smirked. "The best of the best, some would say. So that's how you thought you persuade me, is it?" Slughorn asked, turning to face Dumbledore. "Well, the answer's no, Albus." Eliza knew men like Slughorn. She knew his answer wouldn't stay no for long. "I suppose we can have a drink at least?" asked Dumbledore. "For old time's sake." Slughorn hesitated, eyes darting to Eliza, who rose her eyebrows in question, egging him on. "All right then, one drink," he he said ungraciously, and began pouring 2 glasses. Cheekily, Eliza procured a 3rd glass and held it out to Slughorn, who laughed in spite of himself, filling it up halfway. "You can tell you've been staying with a black," he commented ruefully as they all took their seats on the now fixed furniture. "And how have you been keeping, Horace?" Dumbledore asked, cutting into the conversation. Honestly, the man should just leave the manipulation to her. She was sure that's why she had been brought along. "Dangerous times, Albus. I'm not a fool to ignore your warnings. Death Eaters on the rise, and all that business with—" Slughorn's eyes cut over to her. "Well, you know how it is. I've been on the move for a year. Never stay in one place more than a week. Move from Muggle house to Muggle house. The owners of this place are on holiday in the Canary Islands. It's been very pleasant. I'll be sorry to leave." Slughorn wittered on before Dumbledore mercifully cut him off. "That sounds very tiring, old friend. Now, if you were to return to Hogwarts, you can't tell me that I'll be safer at that pestilential school. You can save your breath, Albus. I might have been in hiding, but some funny rumors have reached me since Dolar's Umbridge left. If that's how you treat teachers these days." Dolar's Umbridge took a rather horrific tumble into the Black Lake. "I'm sure you've heard about the kelpie that lurks within it. It doesn't take too kindly to professors who hurt their students," Eliza said coldly, and Slughorn's attention snapped back to her. Yes, I heard about that kelpie, the Triwizard Tournament, yes." He had just asked when Dumbledore stepped to his feet. "Are you leaving?" Slughorn asked eagerly, and Eliza had to muffle a snort. She too was looking forward to when Dumbledore decided to leave her alone. "No, I was wondering whether I might use your bathroom," said Dumbledore, smiling bemusedly. "Oh," said Slughorn, clearly disappointed. Second on the left down the hall, Dumbledore ambled out of the room, leaving Eliza behind with Slughorn, who shuffled around as if he didn't quite know what to do with himself. "So you said you'd heard of me before. Sirius Black, no doubt," Slughorn commented, trying to fill up the silence. "Sirius Narcissa, even Severus once you get him to loosen up a bit," Eliza said, and a fond smile came across Slughorn's face. "I remember their year, brilliant lot of wizards. Such a shame," Slughorn trailed off, but Eliza knew what he was going to say. "Such a shame about the war, such a shame about the deaths. They told me all about you. Your parties sounded like a riot," Eliza said with a mischievous grin, and Slughorn let out a booming laugh. "Oh, they flatter me, they flatter me. Always liked them. Shame Sirius didn't end up in our house. I had every black until him. He wouldn't have survived in Slytherin," Eliza joked, and Slughorn's strange, shrewd eyes turned back onto her. "And you did, eh?" "And I did," Eliza said with a cutting smirk and downing the rest of her drink. "Look, sir, I'm going to be honest with you." Slughorn looked at her dubiously, but Eliza powered on regardless, from one Slytherin to another. "You should take Dumbledore's offer." Slughorn let out a harsh scoff, but Eliza ignored him. "This isn't any way to live a life. At Hogwarts you'll be safe, protected, and as Slytherin Queen I can safely say these students would love you." Slughorn was shrewd. He knew any ploy she would make, knew to be on guard for Slytherin manipulation. But at the end of the day, no one could resist some brash, Gryffindor honesty. And a man like Slughorn loved to hear about his own importance, so much he would ignore the manipulation hidden beneath her words. "A safe place to stay. Rosmerta's mulled wine. A chance for me to finally experience a famous slug club party." Eliza added in with a crooked grin, and she could visibly see Slughorn's resolve weaken. "A smart man knows when he's beat, sir," Eliza said, pausing for dramatic effect, because unlike Tom, she could admit she sometimes got carried away with herself, or should I say Professor. It was at that point Dumbledore entered the room, and the old man chuckled, obviously hearing Eliza's last comment. "Can I assume you will be coming out of retirement?" he asked, and Slughorn grumbled to himself. All right, he said, as she and Dumbledore headed towards the front door. "I must be mad, but yes. Well then," Dumbledore said as they opened the garden gate, "we shall see you on September 1st, old friend. I'll want a pay rise, Dumbledore." Slughorn shouted at their retreating backs, and Eliza let out a bright laugh. "Thanks for the drink, Professor." She and Dumbledore apparated away, leaving the newest potions professor, Horace Slughorn, behind. Severus was going to be over the moon. "You'll never guess what I did tonight," Eliza exclaimed after Dumbledore had dropped her off home. "Murder. Blaze suggested drolly, and Eliza shot him an affronted look. No, some sort of scheme, Remus asked tiredly, and Eliza made a so-so gesture. Somewhat. Go on then, Sirius said, hanging off the armchair dramatically. What did you do? I convinced Horace Slughorn to come out of retirement. No fucking way. Sirius fell off the armchair in surprise. Eliza was happy to say she wasn't the only one laughing at his expense.